Okay, everyone. I appreciate your time, so I'm going to try and keep this brief and hopefully somewhat enjoyable. But I want to help explain what this whole mustache movement that you probably been aware of is all about. So here's the deal. About 1 in 5 Canadians will experience a mental health concern each year. And this may take form in a mood disorder, anxiety, psychoses, eating disorder, the list goes on. And if any of you have ever experienced something of this sort, you can probably attest that it's a horrendous form of suffering. We also know that 1 in 10 Canadian men will experience an episode of major depression in their lifetime. And this is concerning, as major depression is thought to be the leading cause of suicide. And to speak to the severity of that issue, every 30 seconds someone in the world completes suicide. And every 1.5 seconds it's attempted. And the thing about major depression is no one's immune. It can happen to anyone at any time. We also know that suicide affects men 3 times as often as women. Testicular cancer is the most prevalent type of cancer amongst younger men. And it was estimated that there'll be an additional 1,000 cases diagnosed in Canada alone this year. And this number is expected to increase for reasons that are currently poorly understood. And then there's prostate cancer. And this is the most common form of cancer amongst men. 1 in 8 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lifetime, and the risk for this increases with age. But the good news is these issues have been identified, and they're now being addressed by something that we know as Movember, which is a men's health initiative that was started in 2003. And so Krista told me that you guys are a smart bunch, so I've graphically illustrated to you the history of Movember using the Movember versus time curve, and I'll walk you through this. So on the x-axis we have the year, with a small break in the graph between the beginning of time 4.5 billion years ago and the birth of Movember in 2003. And on the vertical axis we have the number of Movember supporters. And what we see is that in 2003, 30 young gentlemen from Australia decided that it was time that us men just took some notes from our wise counterparts and started talking about some of the health risks that we face. And they started what we now know as Movember. And over time, the number of Movember supporters, again on the y-axis using a logarithmic scale, as you can see here, has increased to over 4 million men and women across 21 different countries. And I'm excited to see the numbers from this year. And if we replace Movember participants with funds raised on the vertical axis, and we look at the area under the curve, we'll see that thus far we've raised $574 million, funding 770 men's health programs across the world. So we're doing okay. And essentially, the vision of Movember is to use the undeniable presence of the mustache to have an everlasting impact on the face of men's health. And we aim to do this by using the mustache as a potent stimulant for conversation about the health risks that men and women face. Secondarily, the goal is to fund men's health programs to help men living with prostate and testicular cancer receive the care they need to feel mentally and physically well. And also to ensure that when men and boys experience mental health concerns, they have the resources and the knowledge to take action early and remedy the situation. So I want to shift gears here a little bit and tell you about my story for no other reason than to ensure that if you or anyone you know experiences something of the sort, to know that you're not the only one and there's definitely hope. So I began working with depression about 4 years ago in the second year of my undergrad. And like most young men, I waited about 2 years to say anything and to seek help. And what I didn't realize at the time is that depression is a medical condition. It's not just something that you can shake off and be done with in a short period of time. That's called a bad mood. And that would also be like asking a person with type 1 diabetes to just produce insulin, right? And unfortunately, it's not that simple. And so for me, it was more confusion than anything at first. It was like, okay, I'm not finding pleasure in anything anymore. You know, perhaps I'm maturing or I'm looking for joy in the wrong places. But as time went on, it eventually became overwhelmingly apparent to me that something was up and that I wasn't okay. And so when I sought help, I learned that I had been dealing with something referred to as dysthymia, which is just a fancy word for like a cyclic low-grade depression, where you go through periods of feeling okay, and then you go through periods of feeling low and down for no apparent reason. And I also learned that this was a well-documented condition, and contrary to my prior belief, I wasn't the only one working with this. And so that was good. And I guess I started dealing with it. And so as treatment, I began sifting through the lens in which I viewed the world and identifying these things called cognitive distortions. These are things that we all have, and they're continually molded since birth, and are thought to contribute to things like depression and anxiety. And essentially what I was trying to do was remove my own bias from the equation and just experience the raw data of life. Perhaps that was contributing to what I was experiencing. And then, about a year and a half ago, I sustained 2 concussions playing rugby. And these occurred fairly close together. And after the second one, I was sidelined from all aspects of life, including sport and school. And I had to defer the start date of my current degree. And as you may have learned in class, these types of injuries may play a role in mental health concerns, both directly on a biological level, but also indirectly on a psychosocial level. And so from there, as I was reintroducing things into my life, I became heavily involved in things like yoga and meditation as a means to recover from this injury. And then I soon realized the importance of those practices for my mental well-being. And so I had cultivated a bunch of good defense mechanisms for dealing with low mood. But despite that, earlier this summer, things became increasingly dark for me. And even though I was working with all these things relentlessly, things got worse. And if you want to label it, I slipped into an episode of major depression where it's no longer cyclic. It's just low and dark all the time, regardless of external influences in the environment. And things like pleasure and joy and excitement seldomly exist in this state. And I was having to eat, sleep, and exercise both physically and mentally in a very calculated manner in an attempt to modulate my brain chemistry or whatever was causing this low mood for me. But most of the time that was just enough to get by. But then last month, quite suddenly, things turned around for me and lifted. And the cloud that seemed to exist over my head only disappeared. And I've been feeling well ever since. And it was the most profound thing that's ever happened to me. But for the first time in a while, I can honestly say that I'm stoked to be here. And so that's my good news story, but it certainly doesn't end here. We need more help. These are big issues. And so this season and beyond, chat with one another about your health and your experience. It's not a comfortable topic, and there's never going to be a convenient time for it, but in my opinion, it needs to happen because this saved me. And secondly, only if you can donate on Movember.com. We have a departmental group called the Macakin Mo Bros, spearheaded by our team captain, Dr. Phillips, and you can donate to the group there, or you can donate to individuals on the campaign. It really doesn't matter. All of the money goes to the same pot. But I hope that I've convinced you that these are important topics for men and women alike. And lastly, rule number 1 on Movember.ca, or .com I should say, is have some fun with this. These are heavy topics, but I think that they can be approached as playfully as you'd like, and I think it's more effective that way anyway. So in the interest of time, that's it for me, but if any of you would like to chat about this later, you can find me. Maybe I can give Krista my email, and yeah, I'd love to chat, but that's it for me, so thanks guys.